Most people think The Handmaid's Tale is just dystopian fiction. But here's the disturbing truth. Margaret Atwood followed one strict rule while writing the story. She refused to invent anything. Every law, every punishment, every act of control over women has already happened somewhere in real history, which means something unsettling. Gilead isn't science fiction. It's a puzzle made from real events. And once you see the pieces, you start to realize something even more shocking. Some of those pieces still exist today. In dystopian fiction, revolutions rarely begin with armies. They begin with questions, and in the Testaments, the long shadow of Gilead may finally be starting to crack. Today on Timeless Tales podcast, we're breaking down the brand new trailer for the Testaments, the long-awaited sequel to The Handmaid's Tale, based on Margaret Atwood's powerful novel. What does this trailer reveal? Who are the new characters? And most importantly, is this the beginning of the end for Gilead? Let's take a closer look.
I'm not really sure what year it was.
But something feels different. This isn't the world of June Osborne anymore. This is the next generation. The story takes place years after the original series and focuses on young women who have grown up inside the system. Unlike June, they didn't remember freedom. They were raised by the regime. And that changes everything. Because when oppression is all you've ever known, rebellion becomes something far more dangerous.
I know I still had my dollhouse. It looked just like our real house.
One of the central characters is Agnes. Raised in Gilead, she appears devoted, obedient, even pious. But dystopian stories thrive on contradiction. Characters who seem loyal to the system often become the ones who see its cracks first. Agnes represents something terrifying for the regime. Someone raised to believe, who begins to doubt.
Some dolls were always busy. Others were always doing the important work.
Then we meet Daisy. She comes from outside Gilead. And in stories like this, outsiders play a crucial role. They ask the questions that insiders are afraid to ask. They see the absurdity of rules that everyone else has normalized. And once those questions begin, systems like Gilead start to weaken. But perhaps the most fascinating figure in the trailer is someone we already know. Aunt Lydia, one of the most complex characters in modern dystopian storytelling. In The Handmaid's Tale, Lydia was an enforcer of the regime. Cruel, loyal, terrifying. But in the Testaments, the story explores something deeper. What happens when someone who helped build a system begins to see its corruption from the inside? History is full of revolutions, sparked not only by rebels, but by insiders who turn. And if Lydia is changing sides, Gilead may have a bigger problem than it realizes. The trailer hints at something fascinating. Much of the story takes place in an elite school for girls in Gilead, which creates a disturbing contrast. Education, but only for obedience. Community, but built on control. It raises a timeless question. Can a regime truly control what people think? Or does knowledge inevitably lead to resistance? Margaret Atwood's writing has always explored this tension, because authoritarian systems rely on one fragile illusion, that the next generation will never question the rules. History suggests otherwise.
Back then, we still believed in this world.
The reason The Handmaid's Tale became such a cultural phenomenon is simple. It didn't feel like fantasy. It felt like a warning. And the Testament shifts that warning into something else. Hope. The story is no longer about surviving Gilead. It's about understanding how oppressive systems eventually collapse. Slowly, quietly, and then all at once.
I guess it's easier to accept a story than believe that the people around you are monsters.
So the question isn't just what will happen in the Testaments. The real question is, who will bring Gilead down? Agnes, Daisy, or the woman who once helped build it? Aunt Lydia. If you enjoy exploring the deeper ideas behind great stories, subscribe to Timeless Tales podcast, because the greatest tales aren't just entertainment, they're reflections of the world we live in, and sometimes warnings about the future. Margaret Atwood's Hidden Secrets, the real history behind Gilead. Here's something many viewers don't know. Margaret Atwood followed a very strict rule when writing The Handmaid's Tale. She refused to invent fictional atrocities. Instead, she made a promise to herself. Everything in the story had to be something that had already happened somewhere in history. That means the punishments, the forced reproduction, the surveillance, the control over women's bodies. None of it was pure imagination. It was history, rearranged into a dystopia, which makes Gilead far more disturbing. Because it isn't fantasy, it's a mirror. Another little-known detail. Margaret Atwood began writing The Handmaid's Tale in 1984 while living in West Berlin, when the city was still divided by the Berlin Wall. She could literally see the contrast between two worlds, freedom and authoritarian control. She later explained that the atmosphere of surveillance, fear, and restricted freedom in parts of Eastern Europe deeply influenced the creation of Gilead. In other words, the world that inspired Gilead was not science fiction, it was Cold War reality. Many elements of the story are rooted in real historical events. For example, the public punishment of women in Gilead echoes the Salem witch trials when women were accused, judged, and executed under religious authority. Atwood also drew inspiration from authoritarian governments that controlled reproduction. One example was Romania under Nicolae Ceausescu, where women were forced to have children to increase the population. Women were monitored, pregnancy was tracked, and contraception was banned. Sound familiar? That's the terrifying secret of Atwood's writing. She didn't invent Gilead. She assembled it from real pieces of history. Margaret Atwood herself has said something chilling in recent interviews. When she first wrote the novel, the idea of such a regime in a democracy seemed almost impossible. But in recent years, she has said the story feels more and more plausible. Why? Because history shows something important. Democracies don't collapse overnight. They change slowly. One law, one restriction, one crisis at a time. And that's exactly how Gilead rises in the story. Not through invasion, but through gradual transformation. But here's the fascinating part. When Margaret Atwood finally wrote the Testaments, more than 30 years after the original book, she had a very specific goal. She wanted to explore something new, how authoritarian regimes eventually collapse. Because history shows something else. No regime like Gilead lasts forever. Eventually, cracks appear. People inside the system begin to question it. Secrets leak, truth spreads, and suddenly the impossible becomes inevitable. Which is exactly why the Testaments focuses on 3 women telling the truth about Gilead. 3 testimonies, 3 perspectives, 3 cracks in the system. So here's the real secret behind Margaret Atwood's world. The Handmaid's Tale was never just a dystopian novel, it was a warning. And the Testaments might be something even more powerful. A reminder that oppressive systems always believe they are permanent, until suddenly, they aren't. Because history shows something remarkable. Empires collapse, walls fall, regimes disappear, but stories survive.
Where do you hail from?
Canada.
I imagine Canada's very different from here.
If you enjoy exploring the hidden history behind great books, subscribe to Timeless Tales podcast. Because sometimes the most terrifying stories are the ones inspired by the real world. And sometimes they tell us exactly what the future might look like.